For those of you who watch our discussions here at TAG, you know that we deal with really the toughest problems in cybersecurity. We talk to great vendors who are dealing with these problems, coming up with effective solutions. I've spent a lifetime worrying about telco security. It's been my career. And I'll tell you that I think things are getting a little more difficult. DDoS and other types of topics are really worth addressing, worth working with some of the best vendors on identifying solutions. Today, we're going to have a discussion with team member from Allot, who I think you're going to like. He's got some good insight into solutions for telcos, and by sort of transitivity, solutions for telcos customers. We need the telcos to be secure. So I hope you stick around and watch our discussion today. I think you'll get some really useful insight, and I hope you learn something. Hi, this is Ed Amoroso from TAG. I want to welcome you to our discussion today. We're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, telecommunications security. Kind of devoted my life to this. I have one of my friends here from Allot Communication. It's Mark Shteiman, who is the Senior Vice President running product over at Allot. We're going to ask him some questions about trends in telecom and some of the problems that we're seeing right now, just between geopolitics and hacktivism and just sort of nation state sponsored attacks. We see a tremendous rise in the threats that telecommunications companies have to deal with. Again, take it from me, it isn't easy dealing with these problems. I spent a lifetime trying to figure it out. I think we're all still trying to figure it out. So we're going to ask Mark to give us some insight. Mark, I want to welcome you to our discussion today. It's nice to see you.
Thank you, Ed, and happy to be with you today. And as you mentioned, Allot is a leading provider in the space of network visibility, traffic management, and of course security. And today's discussion, I believe, we will focus on on the network protection and its importance for the telcos.
People ask me all the time, Ed, where do you learn what's going on in network security and in telco? And in addition to my colleagues, I talk to you guys. I think Allot probably has as much insight into things as anybody. So I'm glad you hopped on. We'll share with the folks watching maybe some insights, not just into the problems that telco customers like government critical infrastructure deal with, but the telcos themselves to protect their infrastructure. That's a really key point. I want to start with this question, basically of kind of nation state and hacktivist sort of sponsored DDoS. We've all been dealing with these problems forever. It seems like they just, I don't know, it seems like the telcos continue to have to contend with a growing threat. Give us some insight into this. In some sense, what's the best way for telecoms to deal with this challenge?
Right. So first of all, I think you're totally right on spotting this trend. Since telcos operating critical infrastructure that provides communication services, as you mentioned, governments, enterprises, SMBs, and of course, consumers, their infrastructure is always in some way involved in these attacks. So either by the means of, actually being utilized by the perpetrators for producing the attacks onto this network, or maybe they provide connectivity to the infected endpoints, which are organized in botnets, and in their place, again, they are attacking other victim networks, but utilizing the network of the CSP himself. So since, telco are being kind of, I would say, gatekeepers to the country's network infrastructure, credible network protection vendor should help and provide them with the best practice and solution. And, probably later we'll discuss also, what Allot is doing, but in a sense that, telco himself have a very limited defense when dealing with such, global attacks, which are again created globally, organized globally. So also the defense must be globally distributed and coordinated.
Is the network protection really around collateral damage in a sense, like customer A or B being attacked, causing problems to the fabric? I mean, is that more or less what we're talking about? Like really, when the attack happens in one area, it could really affect the entire network.
Right. So when we're talking about network protection, we're talking primarily about the protection of the infrastructure itself. So protecting the critical services that the telcos are providing. So, we're talking about firewalls, we are talking about systems which are providing the actual connectivity. So, the DDoS attack against such an important component usually affects not a single, customer or single enterprise. It's really having a global impact on the service availability of this, communication provider.
My observation here, having stared at this literally for the last almost 4 decades, is that it's not so much that the telcos have been remiss, but that the threat is really increasing. It surprises me that it's gone up. So are you seeing the same thing? It's been my instinct here that the threat is growing at a much greater rate than I had ever expected. Am I reading that right?
Yeah, you're totally reading it, correctly from our perspective, from the data that we see, in the production systems. And, there are many different attacks that the networks can experience. So I will give you just an example based on DDoS attacks. Yeah. So in 2022, the amount of DDoS attacks grown by 85%, comparing to 2022, okay? And especially this impact was, let's say, pronounced or, felt very much in the telco industry, which is the second most attacked, industry comparing on the global market, okay? So it's definitely, these numbers, I believe, reflect a wider trend in which the attacks, the amount of attacks has significantly increased, the complexity of the attacks has significantly increased, and let's say the different vectors utilized during these attacks are also basically, the attacks are becoming more and more complex to detect and to mitigate.
Well, one of the fixes that always bothered me the most when we first started seeing this was increasing capacity, because that's a spectacular increase in capital and cost and so on. So it makes perfect sense, and I think the ROI is very high to try to stop the attack, to fix them. And that's kind of where I think you guys come in, like this idea that instead of just widening the gate, for DDoS, which is what we all did in the beginning. We didn't know what else to do. So we were building these gigantic pipes, like building the Lincoln Tunnel for ants to walk through in case they turned into elephants. It was not a very elegant solution. But I've been sort of tracking what you guys do it a lot. I love the way the idea here is to try to solve the problems. Tell me a little bit about the platform. Tell me a little bit about how the solution protects.
Okay, sure.
And what
so maybe just one remark also what you said, that it's always about capacity. Right. I would say, there are, as we mentioned previously, there is capacity growth and there is the complexity growth, right? So definitely the attacks are becoming bigger and bigger, and you really need to have, let's say, telco-grade system in order to be able and scale up to mitigate these kind of attacks. And in the same time, there are different types of attack, what we call hit and run. So these attacks are actually very short in time, but again, very high in the amplitude, let's say, in the bandwidth that they consume. So in this case, again, you have to have a system which can scale up to that kind of bandwidth, but also is able to detect the attack immediately when it happens. So it's not only ability to detect, but to detect it accurately and very quickly, okay? Because, otherwise, even that kind of attack can essentially kill the network.
Okay. That's where we all got it wrong in the beginning. I was deploying people. We were basically sitting with human beings looking at monitors and then doing BGP commands when we saw that something didn't seem right. I always knew that wouldn't work. Now, much of that is automated today, but I think you guys are taking it to the next level. Your team was sharing with me that you guys are starting to use some AI in the
right.
How is that working? I'm very, very, very excited that the telco infrastructure can become AI enabled. Tell us what your approach is.
Right. So I totally agree with you. And you mentioned, automated mitigation. I think that's the only way a modern operator, can cope with the amount of and the complexity of
There's no
data.
choice
Okay?
anymore, really.
No manual work, just automation. Okay, and as you mentioned, we are utilizing AI-based models in order to provide this kind of, first of all, a very accurate detection, and then automatic mitigation. Moreover, the network behaves differently at different locations of the world, right? So our capabilities actually allow us to learn, to train the system with the localized patterns, within that or another network, and then being able to identify the anomalies within the traffic. And again, that's the whole, let's say, beauty of the AI. You're building the model, you're training it differently at each of the location, and then it's able to provide a very accurate with a low false positive results, on per different network.
So, I mean, location certainly one factor that would feed the machine learning training, and that's an important one. It's hard to think of too many telcos that aren't, in some sense, global. I mean, there are local ones, but most of them do. You're right; they're regionally, fundamentally different characteristics. But I'm guessing that as you're training, there's a lot of other factors. Like, for example, legacy infrastructure. These are not greenfields that you're dropping into. There's already existing systems, tools, legacy infrastructure. Do you have to sort of tangle into that? Like if a telco's listening now and they want to use Allot, you're dropping your platform into an existing legacy. How do you pull data from there, and how do you interact with that legacy infrastructure?
Right. So it's you're totally right. When we're providing solution, we need to make sure it's working end to end. And the CSP does not need to replace or change his underlying infrastructure in other components, which will not happen, right? So we have, I would say, a set of open APIs, application programming interfaces, suitable, for different, let's say, interfaces integration. Whether we're talking about, legacy system that you mentioned, but also some modern system which operators are utilizing, for observability or SOX integration, security operations center integration. So basically, using these APIs, we are able to provide all the relevant data that we are identifying, within the network, all the insights, and to integrate within the end-to-end processes of the operator.
Now, for someone watching who does telecom, and I'm assuming most of the people watching this probably work in that area, I know what they're thinking. They're thinking we're dropping this thing into the beating heart of our business. And so I have to ask you about sort of how you protect and secure your own infrastructure, make sure that you're not introducing some sort of collateral damage, by dropping the platform. Really, the first thing we would ask you, to share with us how you do this. So talk a little bit about the robustness, the integrity, the security of your own product as you drop into this infrastructure, because that is a major factor, because outages are unpredictable.
No, I think you're totally right. And being security company puts, let's say, also a lot of pressure on us to integrate, and as you said, to provide a secure company, right? Otherwise, it's going to be very funny. Okay. So security is definitely, on the top of our priority, and not only when we are doing the deployment, but of course during the development. And it's deeply integrated within our secure coding life cycle. So whether we're talking about vulnerabilities assessments, which are done periodically, or penetration testing, which we are performing with some knowledgeable, third parties, best design practices, and code reviews. It's all focused around basically being able to provide the most secure product that we can.
Do you find that a lot of telcos drop you into a very extensive test and staging environment as part of the deployment?
Yes, it's definitely, I would say, also a growing, trend, so to say, especially, from tier one operators on, developed markets where Allot is focusing on. And so if, a couple of years ago, it was only, let's say, selected customers. Today we see it definitely coming from majority of tier 1 and even tier 2 operators.
There are very few people who understand the complexity of running a telecom. It is, I think people take it for granted and assume that, what's the big deal? You're connecting pipes. But wow, it is really complex. So I'm glad that you guys are focused on that. That strikes me as a very an important component. There's a difference between carrier grade and enterprise. Now, one thing that's always been an issue for me, and that for a lot of my colleagues, is false positives. Like that we many times would drop different types of detection equipment, monitoring other things. And you're getting these false positives, and I would manage that and look at the metrics. They're usually just terrible. Is the AI or some other thing that you guys are doing going to maybe help with that? Because as you know, that's one of the #1 problems. If the thing's dinging every 2 minutes and it's finding problems and you lose confidence. What's been your approach to the false positive challenge?
No, so you're totally right, Ed. And AI is basically used, from our perspective, it actually has 2 major goals. Okay, first goal, which we didn't talk about yet, is the zero-day, let's say, vulnerabilities detection or zero-day attacks detection. So
Absolutely. Yes, of course.
Yeah. So that one of the major goals of AI in our system is to be able to identify attacks which are not known yet. Okay, and there are always such attacks there on the market. And the second bullet or second goal is exactly what you said. It's how we are making sure we are reducing the false positive. We are reducing the amount of alerts that we are creating for the operations to actually being able manage and monitor a system in an efficient way. Okay, and that's where AI definitely help us, because we are able to establish a baseline, and then again identify anomalies to this baseline, and also able to identify or to differentiate between just, let's say, a sudden peak of good legitimate traffic. For example, I don't know, maybe Apple is running some update, within the App Store, and that's what causing this uptick in the traffic. To distinguish this, huge traffic sudden events from real attacks, that's where the AI technology helps us to shine in.
If I was doing an ROI on this, and I'm in a telco infrastructure, I'm kind of thinking that the reduction false positive, the better monitoring, the more intelligent automation might allow me to maybe go down some contractors or others that might be monitoring, because most telcos are running lots of contracted staff to be augmenting in this function, and it can be very expensive. That can be a real problem. I have a feeling that someone watching is thinking, well, how do I deploy this? That's probably where the ROI, the financial ROI, comes in, meaning this could be a very positive experience where I drop the Allot platform in and then maybe can save some money. Do you see customers actually saving? That would be my instinct here, that if this works as you describe it, and I have great confidence that it does, I'm not only getting better security, but saving money. Does that come up with your customers at all?
Definitely, and maybe I should mention that also before, but in our product we really treat it as a multi-service platform. Okay, so basically on top of the same platform we are able to provide multiple and different services. So we can provide anti-DDoS detection, we can provide a botnet detection, we can provide a QoE, quality of experience, security, and visibility. And by doing all this within so-called, the same box, of course, it's not a box anymore, right? It can be also containerized edition or any other deployment flavor, but using and providing different services within the same packaging allow us really to consolidate, or allow our customers really to consolidate their expenses, to consolidate, the power that they need to use in order to run all this equipment, reducing the amount of workforces that they require to run, all of these different services. So definitely, it provides let's say, a big improvement on both utilization of the human resources, but also network resources, since we are actually able to remove from the network the malicious traffic. The network equipment is capable of carrying more legitimate traffic, right? So basically providing not only operational cost reduction, but also CapEx reduction.
CapEx reduction is one of the most important parts of managing a telco. I spent a lot of time in that capital group, the security group. We lived within there. I got a firsthand look at how small changes in CapEx, given the size and scope and sort of expansive scale of the telco, amount to so much. I almost couldn't believe how important it is to do the capital management and to do capacity planning properly. It's really something, it's a scale that most people don't understand. Hey, I got to ask you questions maybe out of left field. At TAG, we work in 3 areas. We work in AI, cyber, and also sustainability. But do you guys have any attention to is the sustainability part of the requirement as you guys are building your platform, sort of a more gentle approach, say, to carbon footprint and things like that? Do you guys think about that from a product perspective?
Oh, definitely. And, it comes basically in any, let's say, hardware or platform redesign as one of the requirements. As we are progressing with the development of our platform, we are trying to do more, of course, with the less or with the smaller footprint and with higher efficiency. Okay, so utilizing, let's say, the latest technologies, whether we're talking about, processors or network equipment, always looking for the most efficient components, because, we believe while doing good for ourselves, we're also doing good for our customers, and then eventually, globally.
We've been writing those things into RFPs with telcos now. So most of the time they leave it in and say, yeah, it's the right thing. So I think we see a trend in that area. So, hey, let's close with how it's going. What sort of feedback? How's it going with the telcos? Are you getting positive response in your work here with the telecommunications companies?
So, as you know, we're serving some of the world's leading telcos, globally, whether you're talking about US, Asia, or Europe. Their feedback basically help us to build, I would say, more robust and scalable and reliable systems, because, in this, it's never enough, right? It's all the time we have to build a higher capacity, a more reliable, and to continue to improve, because really, as we said at the beginning, the network infrastructure is the critical element in any country's, infrastructure. So this continuous requirement for the uptime, massive throughput, some regulatory requirements have always driven us to enhance both the platforms, to handle this kind of growth, but also the functionality, the features. So whether we're talking about zero-time detection or automated mitigation that we mentioned previously, QoE assurance, and visibility within the data, we believe that this kind of enhancement help us to continue and meet and exceed the requirements, coming from the tier 1, tier 2 operators globally.
We've covered a lot of ground in a short amount of time here. Really impressive product. Anything I've forgotten to ask you? I might have left some important things out. We did cover a lot of ground, but any additional points that maybe we didn't cover that we should have?
No, I believe we are good. I think it was very interesting to talk with you, and I hope it also will be useful.
I enjoy this area so much. I mean, it's my favorite topic. But hey, if somebody's watching and they want to do a POC, is the website the best place to get in touch with somebody, you get a discussion going?
All information, of course, on all of our solutions are available, on the website. You can get data sheets, use cases, and some also differentiators, of our solution on the website, and we'll be happy to get in touch with you.
There are also anybody watching who's connected to TAG. You're welcome to contact me. I can help direct you to the right folks at Allot to get a discussion going and hopefully get some POC and test and work toward deployment. I have a feeling that this idea of the threat growing, you can reduce in some sense, reduce the vulnerability and risk at the infrastructure level, and maybe save some money. Seems like a complete no-brainer. So, Mark, thanks for spending some time today. I always enjoy chatting with the company. You're great. You guys are great.
Thank you, Ed. It was great talking to you.
And for everyone else watching, we'll see you next time.
Okay.